When I was a little kid, the two things I loved most in life were Godzilla and NES games. So naturally, when Godzilla Monster of Monsters came out, it was like a dream come true. Well, almost. To sum it up, most of the game revolved around getting through very repetitive outer space levels while smashing up tanks and jets, and then fighting against Godzilla's monster enemies. Overall, it was pretty mediocre, but back then, I didn't care. When I got the game as a present for my 10th birthday, I played it night and day as much as I could. Unfortunately, I had traded the game for Amagon a year later, much to my regret when I found out what that game was like. Recently, I had bought a new NES system, and through a lot of hunting and asking around, my friend Billy finally managed to find a copy of Godzilla Monster of Monsters. I was pumped to play my favorite childhood game. It never even occurred to me to ask where Billy had found it. He also gave me some other games like Legend of Zelda, Bomberman, and some stupid thing called Action 52. But Godzilla had to come first. So I started the game, and the nostalgia came flooding back to me like a tidal wave. Godzilla's 8-bit theme song flooded proudly through the speakers, and I was soon grinning like an idiot. Some people laugh at me for playing such outdated games, but I've never had as much enjoyment for any games other than those on the NES. Those 8-bit games take me back to when things were much simpler, more safe. But after what's happened with this game, I don't have those feelings anymore. Anyway, I had forgotten how quick the fun of smashing things as Godzilla wore off in the scrolling levels. The game bombards you with bullets and things crashing into you from every direction, and you're too big to avoid most of them. Although my excitement had worn down some, it wasn't long at all before I had got to my first boss battle. My first opponent was Ghidorah, an obscure squid kaiju who had never been in a Godzilla movie. The most annoying thing about fighting Ghidorah is that he always backs you into a corner and starts smacking you with his tentacle, and you're unable to move until he gets off of you. This move doesn't do any damage, but it can stall you until the timer runs out and you have to start the fight over, and he regains some health. It's as annoying as it sounds, and of course, he did it when I fought him. Only for some reason, this caused the game to glitch up, because once he started smacking me, he never stopped. The timer was supposed to end the fight at around 40 seconds, but this lasted for nearly 5 minutes. And after a while, the graphics began to mess up, with little red blocks all over the place. It was weird, but I just took the game out, blew on it, and then started again. I wasn't about to let a little glitch stand in my way. This time, I defeated Ghidorah and the level's other boss monster, Mogra, without any problems. Then it was on to the next planet, Mars. I browsed around the board and found something unexpected. Where Varen's piece should have been, there was instead a piece representing Titanosaurus. There were only 10 kaiju in the game, and Titanosaurus wasn't one of them. Or so I thought. Perhaps Titanosaurus was originally intended to be in the game, but was swapped out with Varen for some reason? So I began to feel very excited. Not only was I playing my favorite game, but I was playing a prototype of some sort with a new monster. Needless to say, I ran through the levels as fast as I could to see Titanosaurus in action. I fought Ghidorah again and beat him before he could do his tentacle smack, but this time, the glitch started happening when he died. Ghidorah's sprite didn't sink to the bottom of the screen, but instead seemed to be devoured by the glitch, and his eyes started randomly spawning all over the screen. I know now that these glitches with Ghidorah were my first warning sign that something was very wrong with this game. But foolishly I ignored it, and proceeded on to fight Mogra, who this time had a glitch of his own. I was startled to find that Mogra was twice the size he should have been. He was also considerably harder to beat than usual, which is to say, not at all, but soon I had defeated him as well, and when he died, yet another glitch happened. This happened extremely fast, so I was lucky to get a screen cap of it at all, but what happened was that the giant Mogra sprite started to shatter and melt. Also, if you look at the garbled text at the right corner of the screen, you'll notice what appears to be a bird in a cage. I still have no idea what that meant. At this point I was about to fight Titanosaurus, and I was worried as to what kind of glitches would happen this time. But to my surprise, Titanosaurus looked just fine. Even though all the game's bipedal monsters were the same height, Titanosaurus was a bit taller. But since Titanosaurus actually was taller than Godzilla in his film debut, I thought this was kinda cool. After a very fun fight with a monster that wasn't supposed to be in the game, I took over the enemy base and proceeded not to Jupiter like normal, but instead to... Pathos. Pathos was the same as Jupiter in layout, except the board was dark blue rather than green. The first thing I noticed was that all the usual level icons had been replaced by a blue rock and some kind of orange honeycomb shape. I checked the other side of the board to see what the new monster was. Instead of Hedorah, it was Biollante. But that couldn't have been right. Godzilla vs. Biollante didn't come out until 1989, and this game was made in 1988. Perhaps Toho put Biollante in the game to build excitement for the movie next year, but changed their minds? I tried to rationalize the game's abnormalities any way I could, but this would prove to be futile. Pathos' map song was the first new song I heard in the game. Like most of the new songs, it was hard to describe. It started out slow and suspenseful, much slower than any other song in the game. But every 12 seconds or so, there would be a loud clashing sound, and the tempo would change. It was like the composer randomly played parts from 5 different songs with the same instruments. I moved Godzilla over to one of the many blue rock icons and started the level. The level resembled a blue mountain range with a blood-red planet in the sky. There was something odd about the mountains. They had this shredded paper look to them. At first I thought the glitch had affected it, but it looked far too intentional. I quickly noticed something else about this new level. There were no enemies, at all. Not even any obstacles. So without having to focus on anything, I listened to the music while walking through the level unopposed. The music had a sorrowful feel to it. It would have been rather pleasant had I heard it in a normal game. The level went on for 3 screens, but with no obstacles around I finished it very quickly. I tried other levels of the same type to see if any enemies would appear, but none did. There was little else to be seen in the Blue Mountains, so I tried the other level type. I started one of the orange levels, and my eyes were assaulted with a grotesque background of tumorous orange eyes. The sky was the same as the ground, so I assumed the game was indicating that the level took place in a cave. The only enemies around were Matango Spawn, but as you can see, the little bastards were everywhere, and the music certainly didn't help. It was a mixture of screeching sounds and loud drum beats that sounded like a monster's theme in a horror film. After completing the level, I tried to avoid playing through any more of them whenever I could. The map was short, so it was only a few minutes before I was headed towards a rematch with Godzilla and Mogra. But this time, their sprites and attack patterns were vastly different. I fought Mogra first. Mogra's replacement was a flying machine with a slight resemblance to a Pascogola alien. It was a bit like fighting Mothra, only it moved with a lot more grace. It attacked by spinning its front tentacle like a corkscrew, and it still had an I-beam, only now it fired from the drill. This lanky aberration had replaced Godzilla, and the new beast was much more of a challenge. It would run and jump at a fast pace, constantly swinging its arms around and making it hard to get close. And of course, it tried to pin me in the corner with as much annoying resolve as ever. I defeated it using a combination of tail whips and heat beam spamming. Once they were both defeated, I was going to fight Titanosaurus, but when I started the fight, Titanosaurus was nowhere to be seen, and the game simply went back to the map with the Titanosaurus piece now missing. There was no one left to fight now but Biollante, so I eagerly started the battle. I was quite surprised that Biollante started the fight in her rose form. She was immobile and used tentacles to keep me away from the main body, which took the most damage. As expected, she turned into her final form after taking enough damage. The sprite looked pretty damn good for 8-bit. The battle technique was the same, except now Biollante could move, albeit slower than any other monster. Being hit by the tentacles did more damage now, and Biollante could do an acid spit, which I managed to avoid by jumping. Not much more difficult to defeat than Titanosaurus, it took only 2 rounds. But when Biollante was gone, the music had stopped, and there was a new icon replacing the bass. That icon wasn't there before I beat Biollante. It resembled a red tribal mask, and I had a feeling of dread when I saw it. But since it replaced the bass, it had to be the only way to exit Pathos. I moved Godzilla over the mask, and started the level. It was a hellish looking place with no sky. There was fire flickering in the background, fire that looked far more advanced than anything I'd ever seen on the NES. There was music in the form of a slow, steady drum sound resembling a heartbeat. All the text at the top of the screen and the life bar were gone. In their place was a single bit of text in the middle of the screen that said, "Run." My feeling of dread intensified. I cautiously walked through the level, but like the Blue Mountains, there were no enemies. I paced around for a minute before thinking, run? From what? The first time it hit me, I didn't even see it. I heard a noise outside my room and turned back to see if something fell, and when I looked back, Godzilla was dying. I figured it was just another glitch, but I wasn't going to play through the game without Godzilla, so I restarted the game and went to the password screen. Have I ever mentioned how creepy the password screen music is? If you've played the game, you know what I mean. It doesn't at all fit the mood of the game. It's more like something from a horror game. Maybe they made it that way so kids wouldn't cheat. I was quite annoyed at this point, because I thought I was going to have to fight all the monsters again. But that didn't happen. The game started me off right where I was before I started the red face level. So I tried again, making sure to pay attention. That's when I heard a low bellowing sound, and then I saw it. This thing. Do you know the feeling your body has when you feel like you're in extreme danger? You start to recoil and tense up as the adrenaline flows through your veins, and your nerves start to feel very cold? That's the feeling I had when I took this screen cap. I haven't seen all the Godzilla movies, but I'm pretty damn sure this was never in any of them! It had to be something the creators made up, but what kind of sick fuck would put this in a children's game? By sheer dumb luck, or perhaps the adrenaline boost, I managed to run fast enough to get away from it. It ran very fast, so much so that if you saw it, you were almost certainly going to die. And when I say die, I mean your monster gets killed instantly if the creature touches them. Once I had gone back to the map, I was so afraid that I was extremely tempted to just shut off the game and try to pretend this never happened. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It couldn't have been real. And even if I wanted to continue, I still had to get Mothra through this chase level. But as I stayed inactive on the map screen for a few minutes, my fear was replaced by burning curiosity. What the hell had just happened? What was the rest of the game like? I only had to beat this level with Mothra, and then it was on to the next world. But when I moved Mothra to the red face, the game registered it as me beating the level. I was quite relieved. I tried to prepare myself for the next world. Trance.